Hello, hello. Happy Friday. It's halfway through September. How did we get here already?
We made it.
We made it. We're halfway done. I'll tell you what, though. Yesterday was beautiful. I went to an event on a rooftop patio in downtown Raleigh, and it was perfect weather for it. Finally, it
Mhm.
was so nice. It was a little breezy, but it was gorgeous. It was finally like, we're past the what I said a
Humans.
couple weeks ago was hell's front porch because it was so hot and it was finally nice. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the IT Hour. I'm Becky Scott. We've got Urvashi and Chase with us. Welcome back, Chase.
All
Thanks
right.
for
Thanks for having
joining
me.
us. How's everyone doing?
Good. Like you said, it's the hump day of September. So we'll play.
I know. I keep wanting to start singing about Do you remember the 21st of September, but it's not the
I was thinking of
21st
Wake
yet.
Me Up when September ends, but that one's been done to death, so I wasn't going to bring it up, but now I have.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
whoops.
I know, and that's usually toward the beginning of the month either, so I'm like, we missed that too, so, oh well, forget it. We are gonna be talking about SME IT trends. We do this, once a quarter, Chase, usually, I think?
Yeah. Yes, kind of in and around that kind of cadence. I think enough to get a little bit more of a delta because we do have, I'd say, a couple different sections that we'll be talking around, kind of so each, and then we'll kind of go through and kind of baselines. Things go up, things go down. And so it is interesting to see kind of how much it moves, especially against kind of some of the macro environment stuff and then kind of everything else that's going on in the world, right? Technology updates and other pieces. So
Yeah, definitely, it's gonna be really interesting. We are going to do our usual for the most part. We're gonna talk about community and a short update on I Make Work Happen. And I don't think I have any product release announcements yet, except for one short one about next week. And then we will jump right into the trends. And Chase has a lot of info for us. We've got some interesting things in the news. You can see in the chat. People have been talking about what's going on, especially around MGM. And we were also going to mention Caesars as well, because we've got a couple of those things in the news around ransomware and security. So a lot going on in that. So we will get started. A few things in the community. If you didn't see it already, Tom had written a really great post about Apple's announcements this week at their fall event around iPhones and watches and things like that. Some really interesting, if you want to talk about storytelling for a moment, the way Apple introduces things, like when they were talking about their their emergency features on their phones and their watches and stuff like that. I saw like the first 4 or 5 minutes of an introduction where they were showing people celebrating birthdays. And if you haven't seen this, go watch it. It's really good. The first 4 minutes of just all these people celebrating their birthdays and just really short clips of these birthday parties. And then they go on to tell about these incidents that these people had and how either an Apple phone or a watch or something helped pretty much save their lives, and that they probably wouldn't have had those birthdays if they hadn't had that intervention in some way. One, it was a 911 call made by a phone. Another, it was a watch that caught a heart, like a echocardiogram incident and things like that. And it was really well done. And then I watched another one yesterday that was about their sustainability efforts where Mother Nature visits them. It was so good. They just are so good at storytelling. And if you haven't watched those, it's just a master class. Just go. Yeah, thanks for putting that in the chat, Chase.
I thought
It
it
was
was hilarious. Yeah.
it was hilarious. So, Tom posted about the new iPhones and watches and stuff, and then I, posted something about Congress had an event talking about AI yesterday, and so I put a little bit about that because we recently talked about AI and ChatGPT on the IT Hour, and I was just starting conversation about maybe what y'all are talking about around AI in your companies. And if you are talking about that right now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And we've got a post about viewing available tables for Get JC System Insights. And then also using Jump Cloud and Duo for MFA on user portal, SSO applications, and device logins. That one was from Roger. And the Get System Insights, Urvashi, I do believe that was from you. So thank you. And
I saw it from Ryan. I just reposted it, but I'll take some of the credit. Thank you.
yeah, oh yeah, thank you for and Ryan. Yes, he's one of our internal Jump Cloud knowledge gurus. He uses it every day and knows it well. So we tap him for information all the time. Quick update on I Make Work Happen. Please, if you have not gone and looked at the site, we gave a quick demo of it last week. I'm going to paste the link in here. We are still doing that campaign. So go take a look at the site. Go make your card and share it if you haven't, but also don't forget about the contest. We have had our first weekly winner. I'm going to wait to announce that because Alexa is reaching out to the winner and she will probably announce that next week. But we're very excited to have our first winner, and make sure you share and enter to win. On the product side, I'm going to double check and make sure I have this right, because next week we should have Scott Reed on the show, friend of the show, coming to talk about Jump Cloud Go. We originally had him scheduled next month, like a month from now, and he pinged me and said, sorry, I don't want to wait till next month. I want to come on now. And I told him, sorry, Chase is on this week, but how about next week? He's like, okay, fine, next week.
Perfect.
Fine, Chase.
Get excited about Passwordless. I'm not as
Yeah.
this, but I do.
I mean, it's really cool, and he's super excited to come talk about it. And so, yeah, look forward to that next week. Go more in depth about what it is and what you can do with it. It's amazing, and we've got so much more to do on that. So please come join us, and it's gonna be awesome. And we are just gonna jump right into IT trends, shall we? Let's do it.
Let's start there. And then, it's like anything else. We can evolve into other trends. We can talk about casinos and security.
Yeah,
and all
ransomware trends and IT security trends and
what we
what's
do.
going on in Vegas.
What's going on in Vegas. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around Jump Cloud. That will be good. So we can tease it out a little bit, and I'll save it all for Scott next week. But so for IT trends, so as Becky mentioned, on a rotating cadence, we will kind of send out the survey across hundreds, I don't know if it's quite up to thousands of folks, but we kind of get a bunch of different responses, and we take it in a bunch of different sections too. And so there's kind of 5 main categories that I'll kind of talk through some of the trends. And the full report, we'll get a link out here shortly. If you want to dive into it, kind of have like the individual percentage breakdowns. I'm not going to break your brain with that today, but I will kind of cover some of the more interesting stuff that I think popped out, and especially that we've started to do this, and some of the more interesting deltas that we've seen across the different categories. And so first category I'll cover is kind of the business of IT and kind of other things. And with that, I think the more interesting piece is actually the budgets that are related to that. Because then that's kind of like, that's your ammunition for the year. And that kind of helps guide a lot of the decision making that most folks have, especially as it starts to wind down, as we start to reach the hump day of September. A lot of people are thinking about Q4 planning, and kind of that leads into 2024, what's going to go on from there. I know a lot of businesses are going through that cycle. We're going through that cycle. But one of the interesting insights, and I'd say trends that kind of came out from that, is we actually found that budgets are rising, and it was quite a bit. And so it was like 80% of the people that we surveyed, their budgets were rising. And they also felt that they were going to be maintained throughout most of next year as well. So not only are they like, hey, we're giving you a bump, but we also see some longevity against that. And so I thought that was really interesting, especially given everything that we've seen earlier this year in the macro environment, and kind of everyone's kind of tightening that. but we're having a little bit more budget. So I'd love to hear from the chat, like, you guys seeing that? Like, I thought that was a really interesting piece where there's more money flowing into that. One element of that too is I'll kind of quickly dovetail into security, which is kind of the next big block of trends and other pieces, is that it's kind of directly tied to that. And so a lot of admins found that the amount of money that they spend is directly tied to how vulnerable their organization is, right? And so a lot of the budget they there are receiving is kind of within that security pocket or kind of area where you'd say, hey, this is security tooling. I need this. It's mission critical for the business. And that is kind of helping bolster a lot of that. And so we've actually seen that in a lot of conversations that I've had with customers and other pieces and saying, hey, JumpCloud's no longer this is it's part of our security package, right? And that kind of helps like us elevate that and making sure that we can take full advantage of that. And so that has been an increase as well. And so I think that was right around 60%. And the biggest trend, I would say, which is no news here, right? As we start reading through the chat and kind of other things, is external security threats is the name of the game that has been top of mind for everyone. And like close second was like a 20-point spread on terms of where people are focusing their time and attention as they think about security. So external threats is really what most people are thinking about, kind of how they're preparing their organizations, the types of security policies they're laying down, is all that with in mind. Because one of the other elements of that is that we found internal folks, users, people are getting used to this kind of hybrid environment. And so a lot of the IT admins found that, yeah, I think it was 75% of folks felt that their external remote employees are much better at security hygiene practices, other pieces. We're getting used to it. We're getting better kind of learning about phishing emails. We're getting better about kind of having how to operate as a human, right? In your own home or kind of other pieces, right? When you're not in an office and don't have that setting. And so because of that, I think that there's an interesting relation there in terms of internal folks, they're better kind of working remotely. There's less of like, okay, you're not going to mess up things internally for us. Now it's more of what are the threat actors and how do we make sure that you're continuing to be secure no matter where you are, but making sure that it's done so from that eyes of kind of perspective of an external threat actor, which is pretty interesting. The other element on the security side, before I move into kind of some of the other different categories that I thought was interesting, is that over half of the organizations we surveyed are now heavily using biometrics. And so it used to be kind of across the board, and that number has been slowly ticking up. I've seen as we've done this report, I think it started out at 30 odd percent or something like that. And so now like half of organizations have done that. And so I think one, there's probably a couple things at play. One is like I think we're starting to get through a little bit more hardware cycles, right? So people are getting either newer MacBooks or new Windows machines or kind of, and they have those biometrics that are built in. But then I think there's also a little bit more of an uptick in terms of like hardware keys, kind of other elements that you can attach into other devices. And I think those have been some of the pieces too that again ties back into the security budget and say, hey, we want biometrics on it. That kind of fits within those things. And we now have the budget to distribute that to employees and other pieces because we're starting to think about really access anywhere and making sure that as you add in more factors of authentication into that flow, that it's easy for users and other pieces. And we'll kind of get back into some of that friction story, right? So that balance between enhanced levels of security and then enhanced friction for the users is still top of mind for folks. And so it's still kind of petering right around there, which is why we're very passionate about Jump Cloud Go because we feel like that's finally like tipping the scales and be like lots of security and it drives down the user friction like by quite a bit, right? And I can speak to that just because we've been rolling it and using it internally in Jump Cloud for the last couple of weeks, and you do see it a lot in terms of going from there.
I'm
So that,
seeing I'm seeing in the chat though that the interesting thing about the biometrics that you're talking about is people chatting about not quite having that yet. Rob was saying that they were using minis that 2018 Intels and
mm,
hospitality using Oracle apps that you know still require like server 2012, which is out of support and things like that. So I think
yeah.
there's still some lagging in some areas, but it's good to see that number starting to trend up in some sections. It'd be interesting. I know we didn't really break it down so much by industry
Mhm.
in this case, but it would be interesting to see that. whether it
Yeah,
was
that would be a good
field
cross
work.
section. I don't know. I'll have to dive back into how we split up the demographics
Mhm.
and, and kind of pull from there. I will say one area that we do leave are some regional differences. So
Mhm.
like I
Yeah, I
can
know we
tell you,
did US, UK.
yeah, US, UK, and I think even a little bit of France as well. And so what's interesting is as we get into more of the quality of life stuff, France is a delta, which is also very surprising because typically I don't know. I don't live there, so I have different views, and I have kind of other pieces around that. But you can add in those elements. But I think it'd be great to see manufacturing, hospitality, right, and kind of some of the other different areas because I think you know, I'm obviously biased because I've spent my career in kind of venture-backed startups and other pieces, so that's kind of how I view the world. But then there's other elements too in terms of different service capabilities and pieces that we can bring into it. So the next section of trends, and I'll kind of talk about, I guess I led into it with kind of the French and regional differences, is kind of quality of life areas. So we kind of look at, the life IT admins, kind of other pieces. So we ask a little bit more of, how much are you overworked? Are you happy in your role? Kind of all those different things. And so the consensus is admins are happier in their roles than they were a year ago. The interesting piece, though, is they're still reporting the same amount of kind of being overworked and underappreciated. So that actually has been a baseline. And so we've seen that, I'd say, from once we started doing this trends report, it was like burning hot, right? As you start thinking about coming out of the pandemic, making sure that people have access to their stuff. And so that level is kind of like it's notched down a little bit, but it's also been a pretty consistent baseline. But we have seen, recently the happiness levels have come up, which is nice. And then also time for themselves. And so we kind of think like that's a little bit more of the correlation is, hey, we kind of understand it, but I'm going to take time for me. I want to have that. But knowing that hours and being overworked are actually still kind of relatively stable. So that was an interesting kind of delta in quality of life that we've seen from this trend report as compared to previous ones. One other pieces too is, so we've been talking a little bit about kind of IT admins directly. So we also cover our managed service providers. And so within that, and this was a stark stat for me last time, but what it's interesting is it stayed true is that 90% of the folks that we've interviewed either have an MSP currently or are seriously considering one. And so in that kind of within that serious boat, it's kind of like within this quarter or next 6 months that, they have budget lined up in other pieces. And so there's this really close alignment between a lot of admins and MSPs. And so I think that model of kind of a co-managed environment is becoming a lot more popular within those different areas because they're starting to pull in the MSPs because they have a broader expertise of kind of services, cloud backups, kind of all those different elements. And then you start to see kind of this delta between, hey, I want to leverage you for either I want to manage help desk because I want to own the employee relationship, or actually I'll outsource that to my MSP because then I want to focus on all the weird network infrastructure stuff or kind of whatever that might be that is more of a core priority for the organization. So I think we're starting to see that blend a little bit more. And tying back into a little bit more of the security trends, what's interesting is, hey, we're adopting MSPs. We like it. We actually feel that we are more secure than we were without them because they're bringing in that expertise. And one of the biggest concerns about any MSP coming in is around their security. And they say, hey, I don't know if I will be secure enough by picking this MSP or kind of operating with them. So it's kind of like, it's better than nothing because I don't know how too much, but I'm also have concerns around it. So that kind of ties back into these overarching themes that we see where budget is increasing. It's really security focused. And that's driving a lot of concerns about who kind of has their fingers and kind of working with me in amongst my stack and all those different elements. And so I will wrap now, kind of like as we start to cover those big four areas. The last kind of section as we look at a little bit more of the office dynamics, and within that, obviously we all have no offices here, but as we think about kind of working in amongst the organization, kind of what are the interesting trends that we see across the different technology in terms of people. So coming back to that notion of people are better about being working hybrid, they're more have a better hygiene in terms of how they approach security within that. We've actually found that half of the workers have returned to the office. So I think we're really starting to see this equilibrium start to pan out, and it's going to be there for a while because we went from extreme of fully remote, and then kind of started to trickle in. And then we had a lot of organizations be like, great, we're just going to go all in, right? But across the board, we've actually seen that trickle up. So because it started, I think, about kind of 20-30%, and now it's starting to level out. About half the organizations we have people in the office, and then the other half is kind of either they will telecommute. Remember when that was a term, when people would say, hey, I used to telecommute, right? And they kind of either choose to go in the office or not. But you have a little bit more of that, right? Where people are like, I'm just going to do like the Tuesdays and Thursdays in the office, or kind of making sure that they have that balance. So that, I thought that was interesting. And I think we're starting to have that and kind of become a new baseline for folks moving forward, which will be a really interesting dynamic, both security, but also socially, right? As you start to think about some of those elements. Last couple things I'll hit relatively quickly is we saw, as I'm sure most people have seen across the board in multiple different industries, software costs have increased. And so we have this increase of software pricing, as well as the number of tools that admins are still managing. And so even though we will add in a survey question to be like, hey, wouldn't life be easier if you could consolidate multiple of these tools into cohesive platforms and other elements like that? They are still starting to see continued kind of tool spread across that, and rising software costs. And so again, kind of tied into some of that budget. So it might just be more of a fixed notion of saying, hey, we're seeing these raises across the board. We need to increase budget here and fit within the security mix. And then finally, thinking about those devices that we talked about, kind of hardware fresh reset cycles, it's still a heterogeneous mix. And so when we're seeing across a broad swath of folks that it's still mixed environments are here to stay, and they're kind of staying with that. However, we do anticipate that most of the people that we talk to are going to see an increase in Windows devices. And so they say out of kind of all the different devices or kind of things that they're looking at, that we're going to expect the most increase across those Windows managed kind of devices there when we're thinking about them. So I thought that was an interesting mix, kind of taking a look at the business in general, kind of how we're thinking about security, the folks within that, kind of the IT life as you have that, the demographic changes that we've seen, kind of both from the types of devices you're managing, where people are working, and then also too, kind of how MSPs fit within that mix. And so we kind of cover those broad categories, and again, we'll kind of throw in the so you can see all the breakdown percentage. But those were, let's say, the chase highlights. Those are kind of the interesting things that I've seen kind of permeate and change a little bit as we've been doing these reports, to kind of give everyone a little bit of baseline, kind of how the rest of the world has been operating, what they've been seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going through it, and one of the things that I thought was interesting was that the security spending being seen as directly tied to organizational vulnerability. Since we were talking about Vegas and all the things going on there. Gee,
Yeah.
what a surprise, right?
What a surprise! And you don't do that. It is funny, and it does ripple effect. So I guess unfortunately, I'll be attending CrowdStrike's conference next week in Vegas. Guess where they're hosting? At Caesars. So they sent out a whole email to all the attendees, be like, hey, we realize the situation. We're gonna, kind of they're adding in their own kind of like third-party network infrastructure. So it's not even gonna be part of the hotel. Like they're on it, but it's interesting to see that ripple effect, right? Even across attendees, or kind of like within, I'd say, the industry, as you think about those things.
Oh, so CrowdStrike sent that out. Like they're going to do additional on top
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
Wow.
Which
I mean, that's reassuring though for
yeah,
attendees, right? It's like, oh, that's good.
exactly.
Of course, if you're staying at the hotel, you still have to work. But I think
You're on your own.
on Caesars it was their hold on, I'm going to double check because we had it listed. It was their loyalty program database.
Yeah.
So I think if you're not part of the loyalty program, if you're just staying there, then maybe you'll be okay. But still, I mean,
And
if
that
it's
sounds
the
great.
loyalty program this time, it might be the hotel database next time.
Yeah.
Leave all your devices at home. Just take pen and paper and a sleeping bag. You'll be safe.
That's what it is. And I mean, and that's too, it's starting to turn into that where like DEF CON and Black Hat, that was the usual thing forever, right? And it's like, if you want to be there, stay off site, don't do pad and paper, right? Because they'll have the wall being people being pawned and other pieces, right? So it's starting to turn into that a little bit for sure.
Yeah, I was just talking also last night with a friend where we were joking about this particular restaurant in San Jose where it's like, don't talk about your projects that you're working on if they are super secret because there are too many ears in this particular restaurant. And they were like, what's the name of that? And I'm like, oh, I know, because I knew exactly what restaurant they were talking about because everybody goes there, but, there are so many people there. It's like, don't, maybe not talk about your super confidential project there because somebody's gonna overhear it. And we would always see people we knew from other companies and from our company and stuff there. So, and Jake saying go completely analog when visiting Vegas.
100%, right?
Um,
And
because
that
apparently what goes on in Vegas doesn't stay there anymore.
does not. It's highly orchestrated.
Yeah.
Yes. And
Rob's making a
Rob
good
said,
point in chat about, oh, do you wanna read it, Urvashi?
no, I was saying earlier, Rob said that anything that happens in Vegas stays on the front page of Ars Technica.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
his earlier
Yeah,
comment.
I was gonna say what he was just saying now. What really gets me is how much SMB oriented services that require so much technical knowledge yet end up pointed at the office admin because there is no actual IT. That's so true. And even what we were talking about with the MSPs, sometimes all of the security stuff that's coming out can be so specialized that sometimes you do need an MSP if your IT department is only, one or two people and that's not their specialty, sometimes you do need to hire out for someone to help you with that stuff if you want to make sure that your environment is secure or, like you're a Windows person and you need to add Macs. You may need to, hire that out to have somebody help you with that or you're a Mac person and, Windows. I used to use both and now I'm pretty much only using Apple stuff, and I go home to see my parents, and they're like, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And I'm like, "I haven't used Windows in a long time." I'm like, "I don't think
oh,
I can anymore."
all my hotkeys are different. I have no idea. Like, I feel
I
useless.
I mean, I think the last time I used Windows was well before 10. It was I can't even remember what maybe it was definitely after 98. Okay, it was after 98, but it was before 10. So somewhere in the middle there. So yeah, it evaporates so quickly. So sometimes you do need to bring in additional help. You can't
Try being
always
a
do it
tech
all.
person who works in the arts. The questions that you will get. I don't even know where to begin. Somebody asked me how do I insert this into the hashtag? And I was like, I don't, all of these are the wrong words.
That doesn't
Let
make
go.
that doesn't
Let
make
me
sense.
just take it on a completely different route.
I have done that before. I just start talking about something completely different. And they're like, "What?" I'm just answering your question the way you asked it because that didn't make any sense. So I'm going to give you an answer that doesn't make sense either.
You're into
Um,
Bitcoin mining. Let's set you up. That's a good business proposition. It'll be fine. Yeah.
my biggest arc, why do you know do this, Apple, was the lack of window snapping. Finding out about Rectangle app was the most glorious day, is Rob saying. Hey, my office chair stopped going up. Can you look at that? It's a computer chair, so you can fix it, right? You just,
Laughing so hard.
yeah. What do you do, Jonathan? You just shake your head at them. And then you give them a piece of paper that says PEBCAC, and you just tell them to Google it and see what they do.
Don't even get me started on the questions that can be answered easily by Google and people asking other people that, like, hey, do you know the weather is going to be this weekend? I don't know. Either you Google it or I Google it. So
Let me Google that for you. Yeah. You can even send them the website. Let me Google that for you.
I used to, yeah. But then
Yeah.
they get confused and be like, why does this Google look different? And then I have to answer that question. So it's not even worth it at that point.
Yeah. Wait until Rob finds out about Moss for smooth scrolling on non-Apple mice. Oh, Rob says no, Becky. You give them a business card for facilities support. No, that would be too easy. Although when I used to work on a university, yes, we actually had facilities support, but I haven't been at a place that had facilities support in such a long time that, oh,
No.
being why does Google look wrong? Oh, okay. So, any other things related to that? We could get into a debate about the whole return to work, return to office
Yeah.
discussion. Um,
I guess I've
because it
seen,
is interesting, right? I mean, there's a lot of back and forth about that.
yeah. And I see it a lot across different, I'd say, organizations, right? So I think Amazon came out, right, and said, "Hey, we want more folks to come back into it." Google as well. They want more folks coming back in the office. I think there was a couple reports too where there's an insurance company that basically mandated it, and everyone threw up their arms, right, because they had redistributed, or kind of they made choices, right? I think there's a lot of people that moved during the pandemic or in and around it, and then two is remote work. You start to see some of those locations. So as organizations call people back, there are repercussions around kind of what that looks like in the
Yeah,
culture
especially
and some
people
of
that move.
those aspects.
Well, Zoom caused a big kerfluffle when they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to return to office," and people are like, "Wait a minute."
You of all people, Zoom. Come on.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But I am noticing a lot of government, local government, are like cities
Mm,
and even state governments are doing that. I've seen that for a few friends that work for various government entities. They are getting called back, even though they actually had like literal contracts to work remotely. Those are now getting rescinded. So it is, you know, yeah, Sam's saying too many people made life decisions when offices closed that make it impossible for them to go back to the office. And that's true. And then when these contracts are getting rescinded, um, I've known people that have had to literally quit their jobs, that particular job, because that job is rescinding their ability to work remotely. So they have to go find another job. It's an impossible decision, right? Like you moved 2.5 hours away from the office because they told you, oh, don't worry about it. And now they're saying, oh, well, you're gonna have to worry about it now. So what do? You either take the expense of moving back, usually at your own expense, or you try to find something else that will allow you. And there are still a lot of companies that will allow remote work and they're fine with that. It's just it's an odd it's an odd thing that's going on, this debate about are people more productive in the office or out of the office. And some people I've seen, they say, I want to work in an office. I like that interaction with people. I like that collaboration in person. Some people have that type of personality where they like I'm seeing the look of horror.
There are
Oh,
people who like people. That's so weird.
I didn't get into IT for that. No, no one gets into
Exactly.
IT for that. But yes, there are, some creative people or just people with very outgoing personalities. They like being in an office and being around people. Being isolated just isn't good for them, and that's okay. But just mandating it without giving people a choice, that's the really difficult part, or giving people that balance. Because some people, they spend an hour each way commuting, and that cuts into time
yeah,
with their families or wear and tear on their vehicles or just whatever. I mean, it's a lot of it.
yeah. And there's a big mix. I think one of the interesting pieces that I will be curious to see how plays out is, you think about, this is kind of the first, um, let's see, generation is right, but kind of like set of graduates and other, I'd say, young professionals that are entering the workplace, right? Where you went to the office to kind of learn how to be a good employee, kind of how to work, kind of what are the nuances, and kind of understand that how organizations operate. And it's so different kind of starting your career in a remote world where, the tactics and, I'd say, the etiquette of kind of how to be a human, right, remotely, and kind of learn that, versus You start there, and now as companies are starting to transition back into the office a little bit more hybrid, right? Like there's a whole new set of skills that young professionals are relearning, right? In terms of how to deal with people. Like, I don't know. I've never had a water cooler conversation. What do I do? Like, how long does this last? Like, so like little things like that are starting to come back around, which I think it'll be interesting to watch
Mhm.
and start to interact with.
And controlling your face during
But,
in-person
real
conversations,
quick,
like, it's like, well, like, you may have your camera off, but when someone says something stupid and you're like, controlling that facial
Your face
reaction
is so accurate, Becky.
or like, you know,
So many
rolling
emotions.
your eyes.
Oh
So
man,
many
I got
emotions.
so good
Like
at being passive aggressive.
that
Oh yeah,
whole
that sounds like
mhm,
a good idea. Yes.
mm, mm.
Yes.
Yeah, you should go do that. Yeah, that'll go over real well.
Yeah.
You know, control that facial control, like, uh-huh, yeah, sure, I can do that. Today? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, in an hour? You want that in an hour? Uh-huh. Sure. I can do that.
Becky, I was the actor. You're taking my old job.
I've been at this a long time. So yeah, it makes for it makes for interesting things, relearning. Like, well, think about after the pandemic when we spent 2, almost 3 years, um, not interacting with a lot of people and then having to relearn how to people. We all had to relearn how to people. My poor children, they just going back to school was quite the thing for them, and I'm sure for everyone else's too. Um,
But hey, the extroverts all have co-working spaces, which is why I don't even try to go there anymore because everybody wants to be friends. I'm like, no, I just need Wi-Fi. Going back home now.
Want some coffee?
I mean, there's definitely an interesting debate here in the chat because Rob's saying if you were hired as work from home, the places are trying to force you back in, eh. But if you made major life decision because they closed for the human malware breakout, that's kind of on you. Um, yes and no, Rob, because I'm thinking of the places that said, yeah, we're going to be closed and we're just going to let people work from home indefinitely, and people made those decisions based on that, like, oh, it's going to be okay to do that, or they said, I would like to move, and the office said, oh yeah, no problem, and then later on they said, we take that back. Those are the type of situations that I'm referring to where there was an explicit or implicit agreement that that was okay. Um, so I'm thinking more of that, and Mike is saying the damage to the environment, thinking of that as everyone starts to commute and pollute once again. So there's a lot of things. I
Mhm.
personally have worked from home for the majority of the time for about almost 15. Well, actually, my oldest is almost 16, so almost 16 years. Um, Majority of the time. So I'm very fortunate in that regard, but I've also kind of tried to seek out jobs like that on purpose because um, I just don't like traffic. So
Sure, you don't like traffic. Okay, Becky, we believe you. It's not about the people at work. It's the traffic. Yes.
it's too peoply out there.
Yeah, it's too people out there.
Well, I like people in doses. I actually do. Um, Small micro doses.
People's my drug of choice.
Yeah, in
Try
microdoses.
not to
I
die
like
while laughing and drinking
Yeah,
water.
you
Thank
should
you.
not drink on this show. It's hazardous to your health. Yeah, I microdose just a little at a time.
Human microdoser. New
Yes.
t-shirt for Becky.
Yeah. Oh, the smug. Oh, now it's gonna be now. Rob is saying about the smug went way up, and now I'm gonna start thinking about South Park, the smug. If you don't know that, You have to go back and look up that whatever episode that was and go find it because I don't know which one it was. It was a long time ago.
If anyone's tuning in for the first time, this show is about IT. We do come back. We do circle back to that.
IT? What? Huh? Where am I? We get a little nutty here. We're geeks at heart, right? So this is how we get our nerdery in as much as we can. IT news. Thank you, Urvashi, for combing all of the sites and finding the IT news. So do you want to kick us off with what is going on with Mac OS 14?
Ooh, milestone, career milestone, putting this on LinkedIn. I get to read the news today. Oh, well, some of it. Okay. So starting off, I'll do the updates ones. So Mac OS 14 Sonoma is releasing on September 26th, weeks earlier than usual. So Apple says that Mac OS 14 Sonoma will be available on 26th September, which is a week after iOS 17 releases to the public on September 18th. It will be the first update since 2018 to release in September rather than October. Next up, as mentioned previously, iOS 17 hits supported devices on September 18th. That's from Ars Technica also. It'll be available not just on Apple's new iPhones, but also on several older models. But it does cut off some of the older phones, specifically iPhone 10, iPhone 8, and iPhone 8 Plus. iPhone 8 is still around. People still use iPhone 8.
I know someone who
That's
still
news to
has
me.
an iPhone 6. So yeah, they're
Are they on
I
iOS?
don't know what iOS they're on, but what you're on mute.
You're on
Please.
mute.
I was just gonna say, I still got like little test devices. You remember how small these used to be? Like that is tiny.
Yeah.
That looks like an iPod Nano in your hand, by the way.
I know.
I'm thinking about taking that 6 and
Oh.
giving it to my youngest when they turn 13, just to see if they can handle the responsibility of a phone. And then if it survives, then we'll see about a different device after that.
Okay. Do you want me to do one more, or
Yeah,
is
sure.
it over to Becky Scott now for the headline?
Whatever you like.
Okay, I can do the radiation ones. This should be fun. Apple is to issue iPhone 12 software updates in France to address radiation concerns, from The Verge. Apple says it will release a software update for iPhone 12 owners in France after regulators ordered a halt of sales of the phone over concerns that the device was breaching strict radiation exposure limits. Apple has dismissed the claims and says this is related to a specific testing protocol used only by French regulators and is not a safety concern.
What?
And
Apple dismisses a claim? What?
Dun, 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 dun. But now the French National Frequencies Agency is preparing to quickly test this update. So we will see what happens there. And now Belgium and Germany are also reviewing iPhone 12 for radiation violations after France announced that it would halt sales. And yeah, so let's see what happens there. Now over to Becky Scott for the headlines.
What's funny is when you said regulators, I really wanted to say regulators mount up. I was trying not to. So, see, I can't help myself.
Going, man, it's going to be great.
What's that?
So yeah, regulators, get the Nate dog going. 1G, yeah.
Yeah.
Continue on. I don't want to steal the thunder now. The headlines are.
I know. Okay. Chromebooks will get updates for 10 years. Now, in 2020, Google had announced 8 years of software updates for newer Chromebooks, but now there's a new announcement that they're going to do 10 years of updates based on the platform release date. So they'll get useful software updates for longer. 2 whole years extra. Woohoo!
That's interesting too, because I think there was another piece came out, like there was a bunch of school systems that were fighting back because they're like, we now have to brick thousands of Chromebooks, right? Because they're not being updated, not getting patched. And so I wonder if the pressure got
some of the articles said it was because of the backlash.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably because they can't update them that quickly. But isn't it sad that schools might have 10-year-old Chromebooks for their students? I mean, just ugh.
And they'll make them last for another 10 after that.
Get
I
you
tell
into the
you.
internet. As long as you can get to ChatGPT, you'll be fine on your scholastic career.
That's right. All right.
I mean,
So
those kids 10 years from now are going to have phones that are way better than their school Chromebooks.
no
Anyway, do you need to
kidding.
hear that?
They probably will. So Oracle is going to bring its database infrastructure to Azure. This new offering called Oracle Database at Azure gives customers access to the Oracle database services running on Oracle hardware and deployed in Azure data centers. Oracle says that this is designed to marry Oracle's database product with the security, flexibility, and best-in-class services of Azure, including Azure services co-developed with Microsoft's close AI collaborator, OpenAI. Very interesting. Ooh, buyer beware here. There are some fake Cisco WebEx Google ads that abuse tracking templates to push malware. So some threat actors are using Google ads. We've seen several different ways that people have been misusing Google ads, and this is just the latest. They're using tracking templates as a loophole to create convincing WebEx software search ads that redirect users to websites that distribute the BatLoader malware. So obviously, you know, buyer beware of ads and make sure that you are looking at the URL, or better yet, just type in the URL yourself and click over. Although it does say what makes the advertisement look legitimate is that it uses the real WebEx logo and displays a legitimate URL, webex.com, as the click destination. These ad components make the advertisement appear legitimate and indistinguishable from a real advertisement from Cisco. If visitors of the fake WebEx page click on the download buttons, they receive an MSI installer that spawns several processes and runs PowerShell commands to install the BatLoader malware. And this malware will ultimately fetch, decrypt, and execute an additional Danabot malware payload. Oof. So you can't even trust the URL. So maybe just type it in yourself.
Yeah, especially on ads.
Or distribute apps using JumpCloud.
Sign in. But it is interesting because if you are creating Google Ads, you can set what they call like site links, and so you can basically say, hey, it goes to my URL /store or kind of whatever else, right? And then below that you can set, is it this product category, other things, right? And so you can imagine how the URL changes within that. So that is kind of baked into kind of how you can run Google Ads, which is a little interesting, right? Where you can kind of set that. But it is also interesting, right, that hackers are actually spending money on that, right? So we're not going to rely on phishing techniques anymore. We're doing pay-per-click all the way, right? And so that is an interesting tactic.
There's a marketing team at the hacker office that's just like,
what's the budget for Google Ads?
Increase reach.
Yeah, I wonder what their pay-per-click price is. And then our last headline was actually going to be talking about Caesars Entertainment. They confirmed that they did a ransom payment and had some customer data theft. They have a huge loyalty program, and they paid a ransom to avoid online leak of customer data stolen in a recent cyber attack. It was discovered on September 7th that some attackers stole their loyalty program database, which stores driver's license numbers and social security numbers for many customers. They're still investigating. They paid to try and keep the stuff off of the web. They have no evidence to date that any member passwords, PINs, bank account information, or payment card information were acquired. But they also said later in the article that they still have no guarantees, even though they paid to get the information deleted. They still have no guarantees that that information won't show up later. And they paid $15 million of the original $30 million demand.
Lock your stuff down.
Yeah. And then, of course, we were talking earlier about MGM as well. Their incident was slightly different. Chase, you were saying something about that. Let's see, it was cybersecurity issue affecting some of the company's systems.
Yeah. So they forced it a little bit more, like it feels like they went deeper, and so it kind of forcing out, like it was causing like guest problems, like you can get in the room, kind of other pieces. But Vegas loyalty programs are something else, right? And so when Marriott got popped a couple years ago, they also went after the loyalty program, right? Which kind of gives you all those other pieces. But the interesting thing about Vegas stuff is it's often tied in, right? So you can have like, I have my digital card, which I can go up and gamble and then in slots, right? And it's easier to manage because you're thinking about credits that way. And so that's why so much more is tied into bank accounts and other things, right? Especially if you are not from the US and you're kind of trying to set up and making sure these funds are managed, it's often a good bridge. And so a little scary there in terms of how much is in a loyalty program that is then connected to funds for gambling, kind of other things. So
Yeah, it looks like their website, some customers were having trouble getting into their rooms. Company switched to manual operations with the ATMs and credit card machines on property having been affected. The websites, all using the same domain, were down, all showing the same message. Even some of the slot machines weren't functional, showing a temporarily unavailable message. The loyalty app wasn't working, but the MGM Plus and the Sportsbook were. So they haven't disclosed the nature of it publicly yet, but this is the second time they have confirmed a cybersecurity incident since 2019 when one of their cloud services was breached. So don't click on MGM websites, Jeff says. Got it. Um, yeah, it's just definitely get your plan in place and test it, test it, test it. Run scenarios, make sure that it works. So don't just have a plan and say, "Oh, that's good enough. We have a plan. We're all good." Test it. Make sure everybody knows what to do in case something happens. Make sure everything's locked down properly. Make sure that you do your updates. Those 2012 servers, make sure they at least are patched as best you can. Do your patch Tuesday. Watch
bring it
this.
into the trends. Say, hey, it's a security report. It's tied to the budget. Got to maintain it. Right. So that comes back. Right?
Yeah.
Use
Add a little
Jump
bit
Cloud
of
for patch management.
yeah. Conditional access. All those things.
MFA.
Yeah. Jump Cloud Go. But more than that, I mean, there are lots of ways to secure your systems. Make sure you're patching regularly. I know you all know this, but remind the powers that be, right? The ones that think, "Oh, it's good enough." Remind them, "No, it's not. Look at what just happened." We need to patch regularly. We need to force people to have secure passwords. We need to test them. I think somebody said earlier in the chat that there were 3 strikes and you're out on no before phishing. Educate people about phishing because what is your weakest link? People.
Microdosing those humans.
Exactly. Exactly.
Smaller threat surface, less humans. That's
Yeah.
that's where we're heading.
You are the weakest link. Goodbye. Anyone
This is
remember
why
that show?
remote work is amazing because how do you can't, there's too many people in too many places. It's like blockchain, but for people.
But there's still, MFA fatigue with, people trying to overload your MFA and get you to click on something and get in that way. So it's education, but it's also locking things down, not giving people access to things they don't need. Um, not giving somebody at the front desk admin access to your Salesforce instance or something like that. It's all those things and making sure that people have the right access at the right time to the right things. So what's this? They had a plan. It was written on construction paper and crayon. Oh, Rob. Someone got a pat on the head that day as a CEO, put it up there. Yeah, we do need to educate people about those plans and why they're important and point to things like this. And sometimes we have to hit them over the head with the notebook, not the notebook computer, but the paper notebook, because that hurts less. about why these plans are important and why we need to, even though the problem is sometimes convincing people that the time it takes to do these, because it takes time out to create the plan and then to test it, and you're taking people offline to do it, but that is incredibly important to do it now rather than the hours and days that it and money that it costs when an incident happens and you aren't prepared, and it takes you much longer to recover from it than it does if you already know what you're supposed to do. Who's involved in legal, who's involved in the security team, who's involved in IT, who's involved
Yeah.
in crisis comms.
When to reach out to law enforcement, all that, right?
Mhm.
And so
If you've
a
got
lot of
that all
people do it
laid
ahead of
out and you know exactly what and when and how, it goes so much more smoothly. So you need that incident response, you need the recovery plan, you need all of those things. And we
I
will
mean, we do
probably
fire drills all the time. It's why do we not have like security threat drills? Like I feel like that should be a thing.
Mhm. Put your people in a room, do a mock cybersecurity incident where we've just been attacked. What do you do? And run through whatever plan you have as if you are having an attack and see how it goes. Just plan it 1 week and try it out. Make sure it's performing the way it's supposed to. Have all the right people in the room and just do it. You will be glad you did if you ever need it. 100%. There's going to be an Ocean's 14 movie about this in a few years. It'll be a
I
montage of
wrote like a
people.
whole screenplay on the side.
There you go. You should write that. The server hot pocket is fried. I can't get in.
Man, the things they say, the tech things that they say in movies are just like, this is like what, and like this is what ChatGPT thinks a human thinks about ChatGPT, like, but worse.
That'll be a good prompt. Write me a movie script. That's it.
Yeah. But that's actually the fear in Hollywood right now. That's why they're striking, because they don't want their and with good reason, because they already don't get royalties from things being replayed and things like that. Like their royalties have gone way down from replays on TV and things like that. So I can see why. Because if I wrote a book and it sold and then got into a screenplay and then it got played and then got replayed years later, I would want royalties coming from that later on. So I can see why.
Yeah.
Top tech movie moment of all time. Johnny Mnemonic. Loop it through, Jones. I'll have to go back and watch that scene, Rob, because I don't remember. I haven't seen that in ages. I can't even remember. So I couldn't even tell you. Decades? Multi-decades? I really want to go back and watch The Net and see how full it portrays things, since I haven't seen that in a long probably since it came out. So that's another one I'd have to go see how inaccurate it is. So there's lots like that, right? Hackers is probably another one.
And just like other, like Blade Runner, like the original, and you come, you're like, oh, didn't quite pan out that way, but
Oh, Demolition Man. We were just talking about Demolition Man the other day because somebody took a picture of somewhere in a bar where they just had a picture of a shelf that had 3 shells on it. It said use the 3 shells, and people were like, so I don't understand this, and everyone else was like, oh my god, I know what that is. And it was just funny, like, now the people that have seen Demolition Man by the response to that. So I had a good conversation because my kid sent it to me and said, do you get this? And I'm like, of course I do. And they were like, oh, I thought you would. And I was like, oh yeah. So we got in this big conversation about, okay, now you need to see Demolition Man because it's just a classic, So Demolition Man predicted the rise of Taco Bell. And part of that was filmed in San Diego, so it's funny because I used to use that trolley station where the Taco Bell was. That there was a store there, and that was my station that I got off on when I worked at a hotel downtown. So I was like, I know that place. So now I need to go back and watch it because it's been too long. But yes, the 3 seashells. I think that's a perfect place to end. So it is 12:30. We hit it on the dot. A wonderful
Next week we'll be
weekend.
watching Demolition Man together.
Yes.
Everyone's got homework.
Now every restaurant is Taco Bell. So there you go. Go forth and make every restaurant Taco Bell. And have a great weekend. Enjoy the wonderful weather. I hope you're all having great weather. And we will see you and talk Jump Cloud Go and announce some winners of I Make Work Happen. Go enter so you can try to win a $100 Visa gift card and be in the drawing for $1,000 and a nice big swag bag. So see y'all next week. Thanks for joining us again, Chase.
You bet.
And we'll see you later. Bye all.